They're just simply the best chargers we can find. If you came up with a better charger tomorrow, I'd want to see it. But I haven't found anything better, and that's why we're selling it. Neil Dennis is going to talk later after we have our factory representatives give you some information. Some people wanted to know if the second half of this talk is going to be a repeat of the first. It's not. It's a continuation. Neil has developed a lot of ways to make what he's doing a lot more enjoyable and easy. He just told me the name of the talk really should be, if you're going to be lazy, get good at it. And he's been working at that. So, Doug, if you come up and educate us on some of the new aspects of new chargers. Thank you very much.
I'm not going to sing, so don't worry about that. I'm not really sure I need to say much else because Dave maybe said it all for me when he was talking about the Shafer Energizer. But it's always a privilege to be here. I think this is my third year here. I see a lot of familiar faces when I look out in the crowd. Some of you guys get a little more interesting every year. I'm still looking for the one I'm looking for, but there he is right back there from Colorado. Won't mention any names. But anyways, it was a good football game we had a few weeks ago, wasn't it? Okay. Primarily what I sell to PowerFlex would be the Shafer Energizer line. We sell other things. We sell some accessories today. We're selling a few more things all the time, but that's what everybody likes to talk about. That's probably kind of the shiny emerald in our lineup, so that's what I'll focus on. But before I start on that, I guess I'd like to start with what I call a little practical common sense. I had a gentleman come up to me this morning and said, Doug, I got to give a speech here in a few weeks. They want me to talk about what the newest, the latest, the greatest is in power fencing. You know, give me some ideas. And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, well, you know, I can tell you about our Energizers. We got remote control Energizers. We got short pulse length. We've got this, we've got that. But I said, you know what it all boils down to is most all the products have improved. But you can still buy those products that haven't improved. And it's always fun to talk about Energizers and what they'll do, but the reality is, I'm going to downplay my thing here a little bit. If you've got a core Energizer, it's not that hard to fix it. You come to PowerFlex, you get your checkbook out, you buy an Energizer that's going to work for you, you hook it up right, it doesn't take you that long, that problem's solved, okay? So I'm going to start off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the whole scenario. I said, you know, really, if it were me giving that speech, I think what I would talk about is I would talk about the importance of using good products all the way through your system. So, we're running a little behind time. The boss of PowerFlex, which is Connie, and I know that because when Dave and I were putting the new desk in the office, hers weighed more than anybody's. Connie said, Doug, we need to kind of hold questions down if we can, and I'll be here all day today, and then we'll be here all day tomorrow, so we'll be glad to answer any of your questions we can. We'll sure be back here and be available, but I'm going to start off and ask you guys a few questions. How many of you guys are currently using some form of electric fence? Great, great, okay. I'm going to be pretty basic. This is 101. What three components does it take to make an effective fence? Power fence. Ground, okay. Ground rod. Had quite a few questions this morning about grounding, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. What else? Okay, power source. Energizer. Okay, takes a good power source. What else? Fence. Wire, fence. Right there. Okay, takes all three of these. We've got a new unit out. It's probably the largest in the world. Dave's been frothing at the bit to get this in, and it just came here today. It's a 63 joule output unit. We'll talk a little bit about it. You know, I haven't had a chance to really play with it myself yet. but it's almost twice what a 36 is, so I can imagine. But I can also tell you this, if you put it out there on your system, and this isn't right, and this isn't right, you're throwing your money away. Anybody disagree with that? Well, that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. And then we'll bounce into the Energizers. I'll just give you a review of what we got, what's going on, and whatnot there. Let's start off with grounding. Okay? I hear a lot of people go, well, how much ground do I need? Well, these people say that I need so many ground rods per joule of energy. I've been doing this since 1983, and you've got to have some guidelines to go by. But the one thing I can tell you is I cannot tell any one of you guys what it's going to take to properly ground your Energizer on your place. Okay? But I can tell you how you know if your unit is properly grounded once you install it. Okay? Has anybody ever tested their ground system? Good, getting a few hands. The rest of you, why not? Yes, sir.
How do you do it?
How do you do it? All right. Fair question. Let's get into it. Okay? I'm going to assume that if you're using PowerFence, you're going to have some way to read your power. You're going to have a voltmeter. Maybe you're going to have a fault finder. You may have a 5-light tester. I kind of frown on those, but it's better than touching the fence. I promise you that. Okay? So how do you do it? The way you do it is this. Start off with a recommendation. The larger the unit, the more joules of output a unit is, the more ground it's going to require. Okay? Now, if we're trying to ground a unit here versus in West Kansas, it's going to be different. In West Kansas, it's drier soil. We have very little mineral content. Over here, we have a little more moisture normally, but we also have a lot more rocks, so we can't always grind this deep. So I'm not really going to give you a rule of thumb of how many ground rods you need. I'm just going to tell you this. If you're going to put in a permanent Energizer, we're going to start with at least 3 ground rods. And we want those ground rods to be galvanized or stainless steel, and we want them at least 10 feet apart, and we want at least 5.5 foot of soil contact with those ground rods. Now, that'll work great on a 1, 2, or 3 joule unit in most cases. On a 36 joule unit, you're going to need more. Okay? There's one simple way to test it. Once your fence is installed, turn it on, go out on your fence at least 300 feet from your Energizer and take a reading. Maybe you got 6,000 volts, maybe you got 3,000, maybe you got 9,000. Okay? At that point, you start shorting that fence out. We want to pull that fence down below 1,000 volts. Okay? The reason for that is if you want to find out where the holes are in the system, you put it under pressure. And that's what we're doing. We're putting it under pressure. Okay? To get that fence line voltage below 1,000 volts. Now, if you got a 36 joule unit, that can be hard. You may want to park a bulldozer on. You may want to hook it to your neighbor's barbed wire fence. Do whatever you got to do. At that point, go back to your ground rods and stick your voltmeter on your furthest ground rod from the Energizer and take a reading. Ideally, it will have no voltage on it. You got a perfect system when you do that. Okay? Everybody follow me so far? Okay. We're going to short that fence down to at least 1,000 volts. Then we're going to go back to our ground rods. If we got 3, we're going to go to our furthest ground rod from the Energizer, and we're going to take a voltage reading. If that voltage reading is 0, you've got 100% good ground. If it's 0.2, 0.3, you're still pretty good. If it's 0.5, you're starting to be in territory where it's not working. There's been a lot of these I've tested, and they'll have 2,000 or 3,000 volts on it. I'll get a call. I'll go do the troubleshoot. First thing I'll ask the guy is if he has a good ground. Oh yeah, I got a good ground. You know, when I was growing up, a good ground was a tractor axle or a track axle driven in the ground and a piece of copper wire wrapped around it. That's not a good ground. But I'll go through this scenario, and I'll put my voltmeter on that ground rod, and as many times I'll read 3,000 or 4,000 volts maybe more voltage on the ground rod than I got on the fence. And I'll ask the customer if they think their ground is good. And they'll look at me and, well, yeah, I guess it is. I don't know. And I said, well, then touch the ground rod. Well, heck no, I'm not going to do that. It's got 4,000 or 5,000 volts in it. You pretty well know it's not good. The thing is, your fence will not work if you got more voltage on your ground than what you have on your fence. That's just common sense. That's why grounding is so important. It's probably one of the easier things to fix. You just simply drive more ground rods, check your connections, dampen the soil around them, place them in a good place, whatever you got to do, but get that ground voltage down below 0.5 or 500 volts. Once you get that done, you know your ground system on your place is working to its potential. Okay? Now, second thing is once you do that, most people never think to recheck it. Okay? I was talking to a guy this morning, and I said, you should recheck your ground system once a year. I know if I tell you to do it once a year, you're probably going to do it at least once every 3 years, and I'm pretty good with that. Okay? But recheck that. Because what happens is those ground rods deteriorate over time. Maybe a connection comes off of it. You don't know. And a lot of times, all of a sudden, you wake up, you got no power on your fence, and you go to looking down the fence, looking at your charger, calling everybody to find out what's going on, and you should have looked at your ground system. It could be right there. It's important. Okay? The second thing I want to talk a little bit about is the fence itself. What I'm holding up here is a piece of 12.5 gauge high tensile wire. It's preferred for building a permanent high tensile fence. I know you're going to use poly wire sometimes. That's portable, or it should be portable. It doesn't always turn out that way, but it should be. Okay? The reason we recommend 12.5 gauge is because it has a pretty good diameter to it. And that's what carries your power. Kind of give you an idea. Anybody ever used 17 gauge fence wire? You know, the thin stuff? Right? A lot of times it just winds up wrapped around your brush hog or around the cow's leg or something like that. The issue is I can put up a mile of 17 gauge fence wire. And I can put a 63 joule output unit on one end with no load on the fence. And I won't have a lot of power at the other end of it. Because it simply can't carry that much power. Now, if I go in and I put up a 12.5 gauge wire, I increase that dramatically. If this is a mile of fence from this wall to this wall, and I've got one wire up there, I got 1 mile of fence, right? Well, let's say I have 3 wires up here. Now, how much fence do I have? Who said 3 miles? Raise your hands. Okay. Who said anything more than that? Raise your hand. Yeah, you guys are catching on. Kind of. Actually, to me, I still have 1 mile of fence. Okay? It's still a mile from here to here, isn't it? That didn't change. All I did was add more wires. I actually increased my carrying capacity. This wire has 56 ohms of resistance per mile. If I put 2 of these on there and tie them together, I'd have my resistance. I'm now down to half that, about 28 ohms per mile. If I add another one, I've lowered it that much more. Another way to think about it is think about this as being a water pipe, a mile long, and it's a 1/2 inch water pipe. And I'm not getting quite enough water down at the other end, and I got a few leaks in it. So I go to town and I buy a bigger pump, and I put on it. Maybe I get a little more water down at the end, but you can only put so much water through a 1/2 inch water pipe. And then you start getting a few leaks in that water pipe, and you can get very little water at the end. If we increase that water pipe to a 2-inch pipe, and we put a bigger pump on it, now we can move a whole lot more water down that line. Even with some leaks, we're still going to get more water at the end. It's really no different with what we're doing right here. It's just things to think about. Talked to one guy this morning, I think had about 6 miles of fence. It was 1 wire fence, had a 36 joule unit on it. Said he was running a little bit out of power at the end of his fence. He just couldn't keep his voltage up. Well, you think about it, 6 miles going out one direction is quite a long ways to go. okay? And I said, "Is your fence dead end?" He said,